The wind howled through the pine trees on a cold September night in 2006 in Blue Lake, California. The chilly air carried the scent of damp earth and dry leaves, blending with the soft chirping of insects in the darkness. A faint crescent moon cast a dim light over the deserted road leading to the two-story home of the Freedley family, creating eerie shadows that danced across the ground. The crunching of golden leaves underfoot sounded like whispers of fate, heralding an impending tragedy. That night, a peaceful home was suddenly transformed into a living nightmare. In an instant, gunshots rang out, tearing through the stillness. Desperate screams echoed, only to be quickly swallowed by the darkness. Flames erupted violently, licking the walls and spreading rapidly, like a monstrous beast consuming everything in its path. Thick black smoke billowed into the sky, blotting out the night and carrying the acrid stench of destruction. By the time the first fire trucks arrived, the house was engulfed in an inferno. Powerful jets of water blasted the flames, but they seemed powerless against the fury of the blaze. Firefighters battled through the night, their sweat mixing with water in what felt like an endless struggle. As dawn peeked over the horizon, all that remained of the house was a charred pile of ashes, smoke still rising like lingering spirits unwilling to leave. Detective William Morrison stepped onto the scene with a heavy heart. With over 2 decades of experience investigating homicides, he had witnessed plenty of horrors, but the scene before him still sent chills down his spine. The pungent smell of burned flesh mixed with chemicals and scorched wood formed a deadly stench he could never forget. In the living room, amid the rubble and ash, forensic technicians carefully documented every detail. 2 blackened skeletons lay near each other, their positions suggesting a desperate attempt to seek comfort in their final moments. Upon preliminary examination, forensic experts found fractures in the skulls that weren't caused by the heat. These were bullet wounds, clear evidence that the 2 victims had been murdered before the fire. Vicky Freedley, 55, the homeowner, had been a devoted nurse at the local hospital. She was known as a kind-hearted woman, always ready to help neighbors and actively involved in community activities. John Hayward, 36, Vicky's boyfriend, was a skilled carpenter with talented hands. Though their relationship initially faced skepticism due to their age gap, their genuine love and mutual respect gradually won people over. But the horror didn't end there. Outside, in the yard, a blue wheelbarrow had also been reduced to a pile of charred metal. As investigators carefully examined its remains, they discovered small bone fragments inside the cabin. Dental and DNA analysis identified the victim as Becky Freedley, 18, Vicky's youngest daughter. Becky, with her golden hair and bright blue eyes, had been the pride of Blue Lake High School. She was the cheerleading captain, a top student with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Her radiant smile could melt anyone's heart. Now, all that remained were ashes and heartbreaking memories. Sheriff David Reynolds sat in his office, his tired eyes fixed on the preliminary report in front of him. 3 people murdered in cold blood, a house completely destroyed by fire, and no clear clues about the motive or the perpetrator. With nearly 30 years on the force, Reynolds knew this would be one of the most complex and painful cases he'd ever faced. The investigation began by exploring every possible angle. The first suspicion fell on Ron Freedley, Vicky's ex-husband and Becky's biological father. A former deputy sheriff with 25 years of service, Ron possessed the knowledge and skills to carry out such a calculated crime. Furthermore, his divorce from Vicky 3 years prior had been messy, filled with bitter disputes over property and custody. Many in the community remembered seeing Ron drunk and causing disturbances outside Vicky's house after the divorce. On one occasion, police had to intervene when Ron threatened to burn the house down if Vicky didn't return to him. Those threats now seemed chillingly prophetic, with the house indeed having gone up in flames. Detectives immediately began digging into Ron's recent background and whereabouts. They interviewed former colleagues, friends, and acquaintances, but as they delved deeper, a more nuanced picture of Ron began to emerge. Despite past conflicts, he had maintained a good relationship with Becky. He frequently drove her to school, attended her cheerleading performances, and supported her education financially. More importantly, on the night of the murders, Ron had been at a bar over 50 miles from the scene. Multiple witnesses, including the bar owner, staff, and regular patrons, confirmed that Ron had been there from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Security cameras also showed him drinking and watching football the entire time. When informed of the deaths of his daughter and ex-wife, Ron completely broke down. Investigators witnessed him collapse, sobbing and calling out Becky's name. His grief and despair were too raw to be an act. Additionally, gunshot residue tests on his hands and clothes all came back negative. After ruling out Ron as a suspect, investigators widened the scope of their search. They delved into the personal lives of each victim, with special attention to Becky Freedley, the youngest and possibly the primary target. Through interviews with friends and family, another story about Becky gradually unfolded. Behind her bright and happy exterior, she had been caught in a tumultuous relationship. Robert Pape, 20, Becky's ex-boyfriend, quickly became the focus of the investigation. Robert and Becky had started dating when she was just 16. At first, they seemed like the perfect couple. A handsome young man and a beautiful, smart girl, both excelling in school and extracurricular activities. But over time, the relationship soured. Robert became possessive and disturbingly controlling. Becky's classmates recalled that Robert often followed her, checked her phone and messages, and forbade her from seeing male friends. On one occasion, he even fought and assaulted a male student who had helped Becky with a group assignment. His control grew so extreme that Becky had to ask his permission before going anywhere or doing anything. This toxic relationship lasted nearly 2 years, until Becky finally gathered the courage to break up with Robert in early September 2006, just weeks before the murders. According to close friends, Robert refused to accept the breakup. He harassed Becky constantly, sending dozens of messages and calls each day, even threatening suicide if she didn't come back to him. Sarah Mitchell, Becky's best friend, recalled their conversations during Becky's final days. Becky had confided in her that she was terrified of Robert, especially after he threatened to hurt her and her family if she dared to date someone else. Becky had even considered filing a restraining order, but feared that doing so would provoke Robert further. Alongside Robert Pape, another name emerged in the investigation. Christian Smith, 21, Robert's childhood best friend. The two had been inseparable since kindergarten. Christian was known for being fiercely loyal to Robert, defending him in every situation, even when he was clearly in the wrong. A crucial lead came from Tyler Henderson, another friend of Becky's. Tyler said that on the afternoon of September 17th, the day of the crime, Becky called him and said she was meeting Robert and Christian for a hike that evening. Tyler tried to dissuade her, reminding her of Robert's threats, but Becky said she wanted to resolve things civilly and hoped to persuade Robert to accept their breakup. This information was a glimmer of light in the dark cloud of the investigation. It suggested that the meeting might have been a setup for Robert and Christian to execute a brutal plan they had prepared in advance. Investigators immediately questioned Robert Pape and Christian Smith. Both denied any involvement in the crime. They admitted they had planned a hike with Becky, but claimed she had canceled at the last minute. According to them, they spent the night at Christian's house, playing video games and watching movies. However, inconsistencies in their statements began to surface as detectives dug deeper. Robert couldn't recall the specific games they played or the movies they watched. Christian, meanwhile, gave differing details about the timing and their activities that night. Despite significant suspicions, investigators lacked direct physical evidence to charge Robert and Christian. No murder weapon was found, no witnesses saw them near the scene, and no DNA traces of them were discovered at the burned house. The investigation began to stall. Months passed, and the case went from headline news to a cold file collecting dust in the police department. New detectives were assigned, old leads re-examined, but no significant breakthroughs occurred. Ron Freedley, the grieving father, couldn't accept that his daughter's killers were still walking free. After 5 years of waiting in vain, in 2011, he decided to take matters into his own hands. Ron hired Louis Balanos, a private investigator known for his unconventional but effective methods. With over 30 years of experience, Balanos was renowned for extracting information from non-traditional sources. He began by reviewing the entire case file, re-interviewing all witnesses, and seeking out new individuals who might have information. One of Balanos' key strategies was using the media as an investigative tool. He launched a large-scale media campaign to bring the case back into public attention. News articles, TV reports, and radio programs repeatedly discussed the case and its unanswered questions. Balanos also held regular press conferences, publicly criticizing the local police's inefficiency and questioning Robert Pape and Christian Smith's roles in the crime. Public pressure forced authorities to act. In 2012, the case was handed over to a special FBI investigation team. With greater resources and advanced technology, the new team re-examined the old evidence using modern forensic methods. They used advanced DNA analysis to recheck samples collected from the scene. A major breakthrough came when forensic experts discovered a small DNA sample on Becky's jacket, which had been found in a wheelbarrow. The DNA did not belong to Becky or any of her family members. When compared to the database, it matched Christian Smith, At the same time, investigators found a new witness, a man who lived near the Freedley residence. He reported that on the night of the crime, while walking his dog, he saw a car matching Robert Pape's parked near the house about 30 minutes before the fire broke out. He remembered the license plate clearly because the numbers matched his daughter's birth date. With this new evidence, police had enough grounds to obtain arrest warrants for Robert Pape and Christian Smith. In March 2013, nearly 7 years after the murder, both were finally arrested and charged with first-degree murder. News of the arrests spread quickly in the Blue Lake community. Many people felt relieved that justice was finally within reach, while others remained skeptical about securing a conviction after so much time had passed. But in a shocking turn of events, just months after their arrest, the charges against Robert and Christian were dropped. The reason was a serious procedural error during the grand jury presentation. The prosecutor had accidentally disclosed Christian's prior criminal record, something prohibited by criminal procedure law. This mistake invalidated the entire proceeding. The news felt like a punch to the gut for the victim's family. Ron Freedley nearly collapsed from the emotional blow, requiring hospitalization for high blood pressure and severe depression. The Blue Lake community was outraged at the justice system's incompetence. However, the prosecutors didn't give up. They were determined to rebuild the case from the ground up, this time more carefully and meticulously. Over the next 3 years, they gathered more evidence, sought new witnesses, and prepared thoroughly for a new trial. One key discovery during this period was Robert Pape's journal. In it, he detailed his obsession with Becky, his anger over her rejection, and dark thoughts of revenge. Although it didn't explicitly mention a murder plan, the journal revealed Robert's unstable and violent mindset. Investigators also discovered that Christian Smith had purchased a large quantity of gasoline from a station about 10 miles from the Freedley home on the afternoon of the crime. Security cameras captured Christian buying 3 large containers of gas, an unusual amount for an ordinary person. In June 2016, with the new evidence solidified, Robert Pape and Christian Smith were arrested once again. This time, the prosecution was far more prepared, ensuring no procedural errors. The trial of Robert Pape and Christian Smith began in April 2018, nearly 12 years after that fateful night. Courtroom was packed, with Ron Freedley, the victim's family, and numerous journalists in attendance. Throughout the 3-week trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense and emotionally charged. The prosecution presented a logical, detailed chain of evidence that painted a picture of a meticulously planned murder. According to their case, Robert Pape, unable to accept Becky's rejection, had conspired with Christian Smith to kill her. They lured Becky to a remote location under the pretense of going on a hike, but attacked her instead. When they brought Becky's body back to the house to dispose of it, they were unexpectedly met by Vicky and John. To cover up their crime and eliminate witnesses, they shot both and set the house on fire to destroy evidence. The wheelbarrow containing Becky's body was also burned as part of their cover-up plan. Witnesses took the stand one by one, recounting what they knew about the relationship between Robert and Becky, as well as the defendants' personalities and behaviors. Despite being old, the forensic evidence remained persuasive enough to link both defendants to the crime scene. The most shocking moment of the trial came from a new witness, a former cellmate of Christian Smith, who testified that while in custody, Christian had confessed to the crime. He described in detail how they carried out the murder and attempted to cover up the evidence. The defense lawyers tried to challenge the credibility of the long-standing evidence, question the motives of the witnesses, and raise the possibility of other suspects. They emphasized that there was no direct evidence placing their clients at the scene at the time of the murders. However, the prosecution's arguments were more solid and convincing. They pointed out that the combination of circumstantial evidence, when viewed together, painted a clear picture of the defendant's guilt. After 3 tense days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Robert Pape and Christian Smith were found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of Vicky Freedley and John Hayward. Robert was also found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Becky Freedley. As the judge read the verdict, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Ron Freedley sat motionless, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Silent tears streamed down his weathered face. A man who had spent 12 years of his life seeking justice for his daughter and his family. It was not a moment of triumph, but a release after a long journey filled with suffering and despair. On the other side of the courtroom, the families of Robert Pape and Christian Smith sat in crushing silence. Robert's mother, a small woman with silver hair, collapsed into her seat, her shoulders trembling. She couldn't believe that the son she had once cradled in her arms could commit such a horrific crime. Christian's father sat stiff and hollow-eyed, staring into space as if his soul had long since departed. The two defendants reacted in completely different ways to the verdict. Robert Pape sat upright, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold and emotionless. His chilling composure sent a shiver through many in the courtroom. In contrast, Christian Smith collapsed onto the table, trembling like a fall leaf. He shook his head repeatedly, murmuring inaudible words, as if trying to deny the terrifying reality before him. As the defendants were escorted out of the courtroom, Robert Pape turned to look at Ron Freedley. In his gaze there was no remorse, no regret, only a chilling, cold hatred. Christian Smith, meanwhile, kept his head down, avoiding everyone's eyes, staggering as if his soul had left his body. Outside the courthouse, dozens of reporters waited. Camera flashes went off continuously as Ron Freedley stepped out, surrounded by lawyers and family members. He stood silently for a long moment, as if trying to find his voice again. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion, yet clear and firm. Ron shared that no verdict could ever bring back his loved ones. Nothing could erase the pain of losing his daughter, his ex-wife whom he still cared for, and a good friend in John. But at the very least, justice had been served. The ones who committed this horrifying crime would pay for what they had done. He also expressed deep gratitude to Louis Balanos, who had relentlessly worked to bring the case back into the light. Without Balanos' persistence and unique investigative methods, the case might still be gathering dust in a police evidence room, and the killers might still be free. In the weeks following the trial, the Blue Lake community began to heal. The Freedley family home was rebuilt, but no one in the family wanted to live there. Ron decided to transform the house into a community center, a place for youth activities and support programs for victims of domestic violence. The story of Becky Freedley became a painful lesson about toxic relationships and the danger of possessiveness in love. Many schools in the area incorporated her story into their curriculum, teaching students how to recognize warning signs in relationships and how to seek help when needed. A small memorial was erected in Blue Lake Central Park to honor the three victims. Inscribed on it were the names of Vicky Freedley, John Hayward, and Becky Freedley, along with the words, "May their memory live on in our hearts, and may their tragedy become a lesson for the future." Robert Pape was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. Christian Smith received a 50-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. In the early years of his sentence, Robert remained cold and unrepentant. He refused all interviews and never spoke about the case. Christian Smith responded differently. After a long period of depression and breakdown, he began participating in prison rehabilitation programs. He learned woodworking, joined counseling groups, and even wrote letters of apology to the victims' families, letters that Ron Freedley never opened. 5 years after the trial, an investigative journalist published a book about the case, based on thousands of pages of court documents and interviews with hundreds of people involved. The book revealed many previously undisclosed details, including that Robert Pape had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder as a teenager, but his family had kept it hidden to protect their reputation. The book also shed light on Christian Smith's role in the crime. According to those who knew him, Christian always lived in Robert's shadow, constantly trying to please and gain acceptance from his best friend. This psychological dependence made him a tool in Robert's dark schemes. One of the most shocking revelations was that Robert Pape had planned Becky's murder weeks in advance. He had researched unsolved murder cases, studied how to erase evidence, and even practiced shooting at a local gun range. Although Christian Smith knew about these plans, he did nothing to stop them, and even helped Robert prepare. The case also led to significant changes in the local justice system. The Blue Lake Police Department faced heavy criticism for how they initially handled the investigation. As a result, new procedures were introduced to ensure that serious cases would be investigated more thoroughly, and a special unit was established to handle cold cases. Louis Balanos, the private investigator who played a crucial role in solving the case, became a well-known figure in the investigative community. He founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping families of murder victims whose cases remained unsolved. His unique approach, combining traditional investigative methods with media outreach, became a subject of study at several police academies. Ron Freedley continued his life carrying a pain that would never fully fade. He devoted most of his time to charity work and advocacy for victims' rights. He frequently visited schools to tell Becky's story, hoping that the tragedy of his family could help prevent similar ones in the future. Each year, on the anniversary of the 3 victims' deaths, a memorial ceremony is held in Blue Lake Park. Hundreds gather, lighting candles and praying for the lost souls. The flickering candlelight in the darkness looks like tiny stars, reminding everyone of the 3 lives so cruelly taken. The story of the Blue Lake triple homicide has become an indelible part of California's criminal history. It's not just a story of crime and punishment, but also a lesson about the dangers of obsessive love, the importance of recognizing signs of abuse in relationships, and the power of persistence in the pursuit of justice. Years later, when people speak of the case, they remember not only the brutality of the crime, but also the courage of a father who never gave up seeking justice for his daughter. Ron Freedley proved that a parent's love for their child can overcome even death. The new building erected on the former Freedley family property is now a vibrant community center. Children's laughter echoes through the playground. Art and sports classes are held daily, and counseling sessions take place regularly. This is how Ron Freedley chose to honor his lost loved ones, by turning a place of tragedy into one of hope and joy for the community. Inside the center's office hangs a large photo of Becky Freedley, a young woman with a radiant smile and bright blue eyes full of life. Beneath the photo reads the words, "Live each day as if it were your last, love as if there's no tomorrow, and always speak up when you feel unsafe." The Blue Lake triple homicide case may be legally closed, but its lessons will endure. It reminds us of the importance of listening to and trusting our instincts, the necessity of intervening when signs of domestic violence appear, and the strength a community can offer to those in crisis. Blue Lake, once a small town rocked by one of the most horrific murders in its history, has become a symbol of resilience and hope. Its people have not forgotten the past, but they have learned to live with it, transforming pain into strength to build a safer and more united community. As night falls over Blue Lake, the lights from the Freedley Community Center continue to shine brightly. It's more than just physical light. It's the light of hope, of love, and of courage. Things no darkness can ever extinguish.